I invite us to stand as we hear the gospel for today, which is according to St. Matthew, the 17th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became bright as light. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will set up 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they raised their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. So the church that is physically closest to us, that we identify well with in terms of our, I guess you could say, like social ethics or perspective, is the little Quaker community that's tucked into the neighborhood over here. I don't know how many of you have been to to Omni and the Quaker House. They're right in there next to Liquor World. A much larger building right next door to them. There's a really good, I hear, Thai restaurant right in between them. So that's also in there if you want to go check it out. But they're in this neighborhood. It's kind of directly behind Fayetteville Tire and Auto. It's a little house. It's been converted into Omni, and then that's also where the Quakers gather for their meeting. And I don't know how many of you have been to a Quaker meeting before, but a Quaker meeting is basically exactly the opposite in every way of how this community gathers on Sunday morning. So when a Quaker meeting, is silent, entirely silent. And in a lot of contexts, when you go to a Quaker meeting, you come early and you'll be silent before the silence. And I've been reading this it's a really great book, and I highly recommend it, but there's this author from the UK, Lamorna Ash, who wrote a book about traveling around the UK and talking with young Christians about their experience of being Christian in a context where almost nobody is anymore. And she ends up being drawn in the middle of writing this book to gather with Quakers for a pretty extended period of time. And so she's describing that experience. And one of the things that she talks about is there's kind of this pressure cooker of the silence, which is, it's not a rule actually that everybody has to be silent in a Quaker meeting. The rule is you're supposed to wait, and if you have a word that comes to you, ostensibly from God, then you do stand and you speak that word, and then you sit back down and everybody has heard that word, and then they continue to quietly meditate on what you shared. And you can imagine that that's a really unique sociological space, because if everybody always showed up, always thinking they had a word, then you would never have a Quaker meeting, because there would be no silence and it would be really noisy and everybody would constantly be bringing. But because the pressure is that you really should only stand up if it's truly a word. People may spend a long time deciding, do I have a word? And she, in her book, she goes for a long time thinking she's never going to have a word, and then like towards the end of her time doing this, before she transitions to another religious community, she realizes she has this word that she's supposed to share, and she'd be like breaking the rules of what the Quakers want if she didn't share it, and so she ends up sharing this brief thing in one of the services. But maybe put yourself into that space of if you had decided to go to a place where you knew that everybody was going to be quiet together for a long time, how would that shape how you decided to be there? There's another church. It's not does not identify with us in the same way from a social ethics perspective, and is different from us in every way, other than that it was influenced by how unique architecture is in Northwest Arkansas. There's a little church up by, you all know where the Rotary Park is, that big yellow park that was built in Springdale, kind of just north of the inn, the inn in Johnson. If you drive north up that road and you go past the Walmart, and then just north of that, there's a Rotary Park. It's a big park. And just south of that park, there's a building that from the outside looks like it's a converted auto repair center, because it actually is a converted auto repair center. And Marlon Blackwell, who I think probably a lot of us know that name, Marlon Blackwell is the architect who designed the high school. And Marlon Blackwell was actually buddies with the architect who designed this sanctuary, and there's some level of mutual influence and that kind of thing. Marlon Blackwell designed that and won a bunch of awards, but it's actually an Orthodox community, Eastern Orthodox. There's no windows, but when you go inside, you encounter space the way that Orthodox worship. And the way Eastern Orthodox worship is they have a hyperabundance of imagery around, of all these icons. And so when you go into their sanctuary, you have these different kinds of icons that you can venerate. There's candles in front of them. And when they worship, there's this very unique way, which if you've never been, again, it may be hard to imagine, but essentially the priest is up front doing things that the congregation doesn't see and maybe won't even hear what they're doing, because they have a set of prayers that they're supposed to do in the liturgy while the congregation is doing a different set of prayers, and they overlap each other. So it's really the opposite of the silence of the Quakers. It's like this layered language and song where, if you're actively singing something as a community while somebody else is chanting something else, it's beautiful on some levels. You probably heard music like this where there's multiple lyrics going on at the same time, but you don't necessarily know everything. There's a kind of a mystery and separation to it that's created in that space. And I think of these kinds of spaces when I think about this Transfiguration story, because the reality is that the disciples, when they're spending time with Jesus, have seen Jesus being in the world in a lot of different ways that don't look like this. If you think about a lot of the rest of Jesus' ministry, much of it is incredibly human and earthy and not mystical. We know that frequently Jesus was sleeping outside, I guess around a campfire or something like that. They're out on boats in the Sea of Galilee. They're like walking dirty roads between small villages. And you never hear reports that in those moments that Jesus is glowing. He's not like this is not like a Marvel superhero movie where the person is constantly in their costume. Jesus is, for the most part, very I mean, he wore one cloak, so I'm assuming he smelled and didn't bathe and didn't glow most of the time. Maybe that's why only guys were willing to hang out with him. I don't know. And then you come to this moment, so you've gotten this impression of what Jesus is like that's mostly not that. And then you get this layer of something entirely different. They go up on this mountain. Other figures from shared religious history are there on the mountain with him. So it's not just that it's them, but it's like the heavens open up in a variety of different ways, both in terms of a permeability between whoever these saints are that are now with them that are normally not with them, and then also the voice of God itself. So you have this permeability between the regular human voices of the disciples and Jesus, and now God saying stuff from the cloud. And if you take that back to those worship spaces that I mentioned, you can see that essentially that's what all gatherings like this are trying to do in their own ways. It's like every community that gathers for worship is trying to retrieve something like this, mostly unsuccessfully. In Gomorrah Ash's book, because she goes around and talks with all of these young Christians, almost all of them, part of the reason why they returned to Christian community or came to it is because they had some kind of profound religious experience. Sometimes it was highly mystical. You know, like the stories you've maybe heard from people who have had mystical experiences where they just were not anticipating it, and one day they're down in a creek bed or driving on the road, and everything cracks open, and they get profoundly connected to all of creation. You maybe have also talked to people who had this experience because they dropped acid. Or microdosed mushrooms. So, you know, you can kind of force the issue. The problem there is you'll hear one story from somebody who dropped acid and that was the mystical experience they had, and then you talk to somebody else and there was a giant squid that was chasing them for 24 hours. So, I mean, it just kind of depends. So I'm not recommending that necessarily, but I am saying that there's a shared kind of thing here. And so when people have those kinds of experiences, then afterwards they're always kind of trying to relate to it or process that in relationship to the rest of their life. And that's what one thing you have going on in the Transfiguration story today. It's so, I don't know if sad is the right word, melancholy, poignant, that when Jesus glows, Peter wants to lock it in. Let's build these tents. It's Moses. Peter wants to spend more time with Moses. I mean, if Jesus showed up here today, would you not probably say something to him like, do you want an office so you can stay for a while? I mean, it's just so. And in this one, in the way Matthew tells it, there is no scold from Jesus of Peter for having the wrong idea. It's actually kind of different than that. I don't know if this is better than the one that you get in the other Gospels, but it's just the way this one goes, that while Peter is still speaking and making this practical proposal, let's build the 3 tents, God just interrupts with a voice that breaks out of the cloud. which is, again, when I've heard people report mystical experiences is frequently the case. They didn't plan it, they weren't ready for it, it just kind of dropped in on them and changed everything. Okay, so now we turn to us. Because I think thinking about this in relationship to how we do has some merit for us to think about that and why we do it the way we do it. We are, on a certain level, you could say, the way we do is hyper Protestant. Also very enlightenment-y. There was never a lot of expectation before the emergence of Protestantism that everybody was supposed to understand everything that was happening all the time. So, really famously at the Reformation, for example, the Mass was conducted in a language that most people didn't know how to either read or speak, and so you couldn't actually understand it, although maybe somebody explained some parts to you, and so you got a sense of what it meant, even though you didn't understand all of it. But the preachers would even preach in Latin, and nobody spoke Latin mostly, and so you would get this whole kind of service in a language that you didn't understand, and people were fine with that. And in many communities yet today, there's still that kind of thing. The kind of the non-enlightenment-y churches that you maybe are aware of. Pentecostal churches that speak in tongues and bust out of normal English. The desire among many conservative Roman Catholics to return to the Latin Mass. The Eastern Orthodox maintenance of ancient languages that nobody speaks, like Old Church Slavonic. I mean, this is still really common. That's not what we do. You come to church and fully anticipating that everything is going to be in a language that you understand, and you will even be slightly annoyed if we make you sing a song that's kind of hard to sing the first time. Even though we no longer have a common shared songbook and everybody comes from different traditions, and good luck singing any song that everybody always knows, unless it was like the most popular thing that Taylor Swift wrote 2 years ago. Like this is the kind of problem that we have, is like it's not just an anticipation that it will be comprehensible. The Enlightenment is kind of a demand that it be comprehensible. And then when you come, there's supposed to be all kinds of things that help you interpret to you how to do it. It's not supposed to be hard or mysterious, mostly. And yet at the same time, probably everybody came with this sense of like, I would still like to, I don't know. Maybe not everybody in the room is like this. Probably not. But at least some people who come to church, actually they think, maybe I'll meet God there. I don't know, ask yourself that. Is that what you thought? Or you think? And then you have to ask yourself the question about what does it mean to meet God here? And again, with the Enlightenment and the Protestant thing, we have a different understanding probably of what we mean to meet God. That's slightly different than some of those ones where, and maybe in Eastern Orthodox, what you think is that the way you meet God is because you conduct such a mysterious worship service that the heavens come down, and in that room, which used to be a shop to repair cars, heaven emerges as this like sacred space, and you don't have to understand it, but God is here. The Enlightenment is more along the lines of kind of like the Levinas idea that you encounter God in the face of your neighbor. If you encounter God in the face of your neighbor, then no wonder everybody just wants to talk to each other in the narthex before church. Forget about the weird prayers that somebody's going to pray, especially the Psalms, which nobody can understand, even though they're the best thing in the Bible. They're really weird, and you actually have to do some work. So it's a little bit easier on some levels to just be like, well, I'll just meet God in the narthex. And humans are really mysterious and hard to relate to on another level. So that's not so easy after all. And the introverts all had to steel themselves before they got here to do that thing. But that's how we do. And yet we have little glimmers in the midst of this of the comprehensibility that's still entirely incomprehensible. Every Sunday when you come for communion, somebody will say to you as they hand you the bread, "This is the body of Christ." And your hyper-rational, hyper-Protestant response might be, "Oh, that's just a symbol." And then there's another part of you that might remain Lutheran or Catholic, and kind of Flannery O'Connor-esque, who said famously at a debate at a table, you know this story about Flannery O'Connor? She was at a table with a bunch of people once, famous people, I think, actually. And you all know who Flannery O'Connor is, at least, the writer? Okay. So Flannery's at this table, and she was famously contrarian. They're sitting at this table, like talking, and somebody at the table says, "Well, that just like symbolizes the presence of Christ. That's what it means." And Flannery O'Connor like leans into the table and says, "Well, if it just symbolizes it, if it's just a symbol, then to hell with it." Like to her, it was very important as a Roman Catholic that if you're going to say that, you should mean what you say. It's really the body of Christ. And so we do this, and you have to sort out what you even think about that. And although most of the time you probably don't force yourself to do it very much because everybody else went up, so why shouldn't you? In reality, that's a complex event. And we say other things too that can surprise us if we think about it, like at the Eucharist, we'll sometimes say that it's not just us who are praying, but angels too. So what is going on? That's the interesting question. And what do you want to do together when we gather for this space, given what you think is going on? And that's the tension that the Transfiguration kind of invites us into as we begin the Lenten season. Is this going to be a space where sometimes it evokes those glimmers that you've had in the past where you feel like you were just in the middle of something and suddenly God was there? Or maybe you've always come and you've felt always like God has never been there, and yet you keep living in anticipation of the possibility that maybe God might. There's no guarantees. I once took a class with a guy who says, anyway, that he fasted the entirety of Lent, 40 days, pastor who was in a class with mine. And what he told us was, at the end of that, fasting 40 days, he thought the whole time that he was going to have some kind of profound religious experience because he fasted such a long time. And at the end of it, he was just starving. And that's it. And he went into a deep depression for a very long time because he'd done this thing and God hadn't shown up. So you can't force the transfiguration. I'll end with this. I have a friend who's a pastor in Iceland, and she has started this tradition of posting on the weekend that she's leading. She leads church in different little rural churches around the region of Iceland that she lives. Not very many people in Iceland go to church anymore, even though it's a Lutheran country. And so the parishes are small, but she'll go around and she leads these worship services. And she always posts on Facebook and she says, the heart draws us to worship at, and then names the place where she is going to lead church. And I've been liking that for a while now. I'm not entirely sure why I like it. I think my own hyper-rationality and hyper-Protestantism is a little bit nervous about not being able to say the why. Like, what I would like to do is tell you all the reasons why it's good to go to church. There are actually a lot of reasons. On average, Americans, when surveyed, who go to church every week are 40% happier than people who don't go to church every week. Now, correlation is not causation, so it could be that happier people feel better about getting out and being with other people than sadder people. I'm not quite sure. But I could tell you all kinds of reasons why it's good for you or us. It's good for my ego the more full the pews are. So, of course, there's that whole thing too, right? So I'm not quite sure what to do with this. My heart draws us. But I shared that, and she replied with this really interesting comment. She said, "What other reason is there?" Guilt? Habit? I mean, there are lots of other reasons why people go to church. But what's the right invitation to it? You come because of your heart. That it's closed, that it's open, it's unsure, it's cold, it's really hot. I mean, this is not clearly defined. There's only one kind of heart that wants to go to church. But your heart draws you. And there's this proximity, there's this zone, there's this mystery. Which is why you're here. And you can practice it in silence. You can practice it in Old Church Slavonic. You can practice it with really good cookies and thinly brewed coffee in the narthex. Albert, I'm looking at you.
We're almost done with coffee.
But it's your heart, right? We are a heart. And that's why we're here. And that's how we'll begin Lent. Amen.